Hi, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure to have Mert, founder of Helius. How are you, Mert?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, to kick off, could you please introduce a little bit about your background, your journey, how you ended up with crypto and how you ended up with Dubai?
Sure, yeah. So I went to school for math and engineering. I was actually going to do a PhD in theoretical physics. And I worked at BlackBerry during a time where they were transitioning from keyboard phones to kind of a security company. And I did an internship there for a year. And that was much more fun and chaotic than writing papers and solving math equations for me. So when I came back, I basically changed all my classes and I started doing much more practical work. Some of that included cryptography, math courses like pure cryptography, which is where I found about crypto because it was one of the applications. But there wasn't many good use cases for crypto at the time. So what I did was...
When?
This would have been 2015, 2014, something like that.
Okay. So only Bitcoin and Ethereum?
Yes, yes. The Ethereum was live, but they were doing very weird things with Ethereum back then, no DeFi or anything. And at the time, so I went into finance. I was in Canada, so I worked for 3 of the big 5 banks in Canada, TD, BMO, Scotiabank. That was moving too slow for me, and that's where I learned all about how money moves, and I worked on some infrastructure for investment banking and all these things. And then it was too slow, so I started working for a startup. It got acquired by Flash or Shutterstock, if people know what Shutterstock is. And then I worked at Canada's only unicorn startup at the time, Clearbank, which was basically non-dilutive funding for entrepreneurs. We call it the 1-second term sheet. And I worked on the treasury team there, building debit cards and managing how money moves on fintech rails. And one day what happened was I had to build a system that moves money from Canada to Australia. And I thought it would have been as easy as just moving the money there and writing a few lines of code. It was not. You had to get a lot of weird allowances and the money had to hop between different places. And it was very inefficient. And so I said, why don't we just use something like Bitcoin? Or I don't remember exactly what crypto I used at that time. But basically, people thought that crypto was still maybe not super trustworthy. And so I didn't like that answer. So I joined Coinbase. And this was slightly like right before Coinbase went public. So when they were still a startup, slightly smaller team, and full of very smart crypto native talent, which have all went on to start companies at this point. And so worked there for just over a year and got to work with all the different blockchains, Ethereum, Avalanche, even Optimus and Polygon at the time. And then I would work on Solana on my own time. And I noticed a lot of problems within crypto, specifically no real applications at that time. And so I started Helius, which helps developers build applications cheap, fast, and scalable.
I think there are many Coinbase alumni doing great startups and unicorn with this domain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, I feel like there are some kind of Coinbase alumni network or Coinbase mafia over there. Do you think that's the case? Like, how do you feel the Coinbase, the whole network enable the founders?
Yeah, they do have an alumni network, either through investments or DAOs and stuff like that. I was never too into that sort of stuff because I don't think I'm still friends with quite a few people from Coinbase. Yeah. But most folks from Coinbase tend to be very Ethereum centric. And my circles tended to be much more Solana centric. And so there wasn't much overlap, although there is some. Yeah, most of those guys went on to found pretty solid companies, starting from DYDX with Antonio and the Zora guys as well.
Yeah. And I guess most of the alumni, they're doing their startup and we initially based in US. You might be one of the minority who leave the US and come to Dubai.
Coinbase is very US centric. They're trying to change that, but most of them are from there. I was in Canada. I was, I believe, first or second Canadian hire when they just opened up the Canadian office. But Canada is not very friendly for crypto, so I moved here to Dubai.
Yeah. I think that I also spent 2 years in Canada doing my MBA, and I feel like Canada is a great place to incubate some great idea or innovation. Like even the AI, Jeffrey hinted, right? Ethereum, Vitalik. But in the end,
CZ too.
CZ as well. Yeah. But in the end, sounds like when they finish the incubation period, and then they go somewhere else to grow it a bit.
Exactly. Yeah, we call it the brain drain. Everybody goes to Waterloo or UFT or McGill, and then the second they have any potential, they just leave.
Yeah, I think Elon also got the first 2 years in Queen's University.
Yep, that's where I went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pivot the topic a little bit. Come to the Solana. Actually, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I went through a lot. The one you did with Lily, etc. And I think there are many reasons about the advantage of the Solana. And in general, what do you compare Solana with all the mainstream popular chain like Base or Avalanche, etc. I mean, like you as a Coinbase alumni, I guess by default you might most of the them are sort of East Maxi, right? So what do you compare with them, and how do you make the commitment into Solana in the end?
Yeah, so there's a few answers depending on who you are or what time you got into Solana. But at the time when I started Helius, for example, Ethereum, everybody knows Ethereum, the L1 does not scale. It's not meant for scale. The way they scale is through L2s that settle to Ethereum eventually. I, at the time, was very annoyed by the lack of useful applications in crypto. So stablecoins, payments, RWAs, things like this just didn't really exist too much. And my thesis for this at the time was they've never actually had a scalable blockchain to work with yet, right? At the time, this is 2021, there simply wasn't anything that did even over 200 TPS, really. And I figured that Ethereum would get there, right, within, let's say, 5 to 6 years, because they had to have the proof of work to proof of stake merge, L2s to go live, blobs to go live, and all these different things to go live. And that just seemed very prone to failure, where you have to keep multiplying conditional probabilities that evaluate to success. Whereas Solana was much more comfortable for me because it was very physics-based, right? Solana is all about, we have machines all over the world. How do we make them talk to each other as fast as physics allows? And me and my co-founders, actually, we all did physics and math. And so we already understood and learned in school, for example, and worked with some of this stuff. And so we felt quite comfortable with it. And that's how it started. But over time, I think within, let's say, 5 years, most new blockchains will be quite scalable. And I don't think performance will be a big differentiator. So Sui is already quite performant. Some of these new L2s could be quite performant in the future as well. And so then what happens is you need to get a moat through some other way. And I believe that the way to do that is something called Lily and Akshay call the FAT thesis, founders, apps, and tokens, which is to be the best place for founders to launch businesses, best place for apps and for them to get revenue, and the best place to launch tokens. Now, those tokens might be meme coins, but they could also be RWAs, stable coins, and anything of that nature. And since the chain is fast, cheap, scalable, but also there's a lot of founder infrastructure to support you. So things like Super Team, for example, which you probably met in Dubai.
Yeah.
That's like this environment, which is what I consider to be something like the Silicon Valley of crypto, where if you're an app, if you're a founder who wants to just launch an app or a token or whatever, and just focus on products as opposed to research and all these technicalities, then I think Solana is the best place.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I also have another analogy, for this to share. I think both you and me, we came from the Web2 background. And like, 2009, 2008, when there is a mobile internet layer one competition, the major competitors are iOS and Android. But also we come up with other, layer one competitors, right? Like C-band operating system from BlackBerry and Samsung, etc. But in the end of the day, I mean, I think luckily for the mobile internet, they don't have much headache about how to address the technical challenge of the TPS. So in general, people just compete with each other for the operating system, for the supply side and the demand side. The supply side will be the founders and app, and the demand side will be like how you can attract more users. And in the end of the day, it's going to be a flywheel. And gradually, the third players, began to back off, and there's only two, sort of layer one of mobile internet over there, which is iOS and Android.
Yeah, I think so. When I was first starting Helius, a lot of people would tell me, "Yeah, you must build on EVM because that's going to be the one that wins everything."
Okay.
But then I would think basically how you're thinking, which is, okay, well, if you look into the software industry on any level, if you look at mobile operating systems, it's not just one. It's not just iOS. There's also Android, and people also tried like Windows Phone, BBM, and all these things. Same with operating systems for computers. It's not just Windows. There's also Mac. There's also Linux. Same with basically everything you can think of. Like there isn't just PlayStation. There's also Xbox and Nintendo. And so I figured it's not really going to be the case that like no software industry in history so far, even microprocessors, right? There's not just Intel. There's always some competition because there's always different things to optimize for that the incumbent is overlooking. And so that was the thesis at the time. And now the SVM is the fastest growing developer ecosystem in crypto, which according to Electric Capital, and it has been number one or number two for many metrics such as revenue, volumes, TVL, all these things. So it's playing out.
Yeah. Sometimes, I'm thinking why in Web3 people care about TPS so much. Because, in Web2, very few people discuss about the TPS.
Yeah.
Because as long as you have more centralized server, and then TPS is never an issue. But I guess, to some extent, the drawback about the Web3 design is the TPS. And that is why, all the global developers have to work very hard to make sure, this one will not be the bottleneck. Having said that, I guess, the highlight for the Web3 would be, the ownership of the data as a sovereign individual. What do you think about this? Because, a lot of Web2 investors I come across, they don't like Web3 because, they feel Web3 is not efficient enough. Even they are, very sort of underperforming in the TPS. This is one of the key arguments from them.
Correct. Yeah. So, well, I think it's mostly historical context because, for example, when I was, as we talked about earlier, when I was in school and discovering how crypto works and blockchains work, one of the biggest knocks for blockchains was that, well, it's just an inefficient database.
Yeah, inefficient.
Right? You just need to replicate everything all over the world, and it's slow. And obviously, Bitcoin wasn't very fast, and then Ethereum. So Bitcoin and Ethereum obviously are the ones that everybody knows of, and so those aren't the ones representing the industry aren't designed for scale. They're designed. Bitcoin is obviously for digital gold and store of value. Ethereum was more like world computer / smart contracts at first, but it wasn't designed for scale in mind. And I don't think it was until Solana where we actually started seeing blockchains like they can actually scale, right? So Solana's design philosophy is basically you should be able to get pretty close to the performance you get on one machine on multiple machines if you optimize the physics correctly. So if you look at the team's background for Solana Labs or Anza now, they are all people who worked in, for example, Qualcomm, Dropbox, even particle physics like CERN, Europe, etc. And they're the first ones where they're like, okay, so far this field has been very science-driven and research-driven. It's now time to make it engineering-driven, where we care about the pragmatic trade-offs to get to those. And then Sui, Aptos, etc. followed on. But that's really the reason. And so when people say like, there's two schools of thought on this. people used to say that crypto is very early still, right? They'll go on Twitter and say it's still early, whatever. It's not true for the entire industry. Like Bitcoin has been around for over a decade. Same with Ethereum. It's been around for slightly around a decade. But scalable smart contract platforms like Solana have really only been around for 2 years, right? I don't even think Solana really scaled until 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And then now you have Sweep, and then now you have these new L2s. And so it's really like the first 2-3 years of scalable blockchains, which I think that message will take some time to get across to the mainstream.
Yeah. Okay. So next question would be, given that you mentioned, Solana, Sui, etc., like they are very powerful challenger to Ethereum, etc. I think, in this season, there are still many founders who rush into this industry to create their own layer 1 and a layer 2.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think, this is still a legit startup thesis, or you would, sort of recommend them to, leave this niche thesis to do something else?
Main premise behind starting a startup in general should be that the founder has a problem they're very passionate about or they're very annoyed by that they need to solve, like they can't sleep otherwise, for example. And in Web 2, that means you work on product and you work on very ambitious things. Like, for example, you can look at any of Elon Musk's companies. They're quite ambitious and all these things. In crypto, that doesn't really seem to be the case as much because the incentives are very short term, right? You can launch an L1 and the L1 will probably be valued at least $1 billion, even if it doesn't work or even if it's not live. And that can be very distracting. And so I think people get distracted by launching chains to sell block space instead of solving any real problems that exist. And then there's also what I just mentioned, which is the scalable chains are still quite early. And some folks genuinely think there's still improvements to be made in that design space so that the chains are actually better designed for future scale. So it could make sense if you're super competent at designing distributed systems and all these things. But truth be told, there aren't many of those in the world, many people who are actually very good at those things. And so I would say the biggest shortage in crypto is just going to be regular apps and so like a good example actually is comparing something like Toronto or Canada to Dubai.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is in Canada, I can't use crypto for anything. And in fact, there are limits to how much of crypto I can buy. For example, in Ontario, I cannot buy over 30K CAD of anything except Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash. Versus here, I can buy a house with Solana. So I can actually use it. And there's a bunch of different ecosystems. I can pay my phone bills, like due bills with crypto and all these things. And so there's actually real use cases there. And I think since these scalable chains now exist, that's where the interesting design space is to focus on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, I guess most of the founder, they want to do a L1 or L2 because of the 1 billion base case valuation.
Yeah.
And, given that crypto now is the global second largest capital market, and also, the bar to get securitized of your assets is so low, right? Basically democratized. Everyone can issue token. And why don't we issue a L1 thesis token and enjoy the 1 billion, 2 billion valuation?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly there's a lot of it driven by that. There are also now people who obviously specialize in serving certain components of blockchains. So for example, DA layers, where the way their business works is they need more L2s to launch, for example, right? And so they will say launch L2s and all these things. And they will say, well, apps should launch as app chains or L2s. And it's like, perhaps some apps would benefit from that, but I think the much easier thing, but also the more sensible thing is launch as a normal app first on a generalized L1 or generalized L2. And then if you have traction and then now you want to tweak your margins and start capturing more of that, then you can look into launching your own chain, for example. But if you do it right from the beginning, you're going to spend so much time on the infrastructure and all the headaches that come with maintaining your own chain that you're not going to be able to really focus on product market fit.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thesis, back to when Facebook want to launch its blockchain and a stable coin. Basically, Facebook is a app with like 1 billion or 2 billion daily active user. And then gradually they come up with the idea like, why don't we create our stable coin and, layer one, etc. Unfortunately, they didn't, go through, get the approval from the regulator. But I guess, they share the common sort of a strategy as you shared just before.
Yeah.
Another topic I want to discuss about the PayFi. Both of us, we came from the Web2 domain. And PayFi in Web2 and the fintech domain has been more than 70 years, I think. After the Second World War, there is the SWIFT and the Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, etc. So we have, all the fintech infrastructure layer and application layer already. Having said that, I do feel like, when we talk about the domestic digital payment, it is very convenient by leveraging the Web2 solution. But when we come to the cross-border money remittance, etc., Web3 really is a, sort of a killer solution. But I mean, for the PayFi thesis in the crypto, I think it's a proven thesis already because, there are 200 billion circulation of the USDT and USDC. And the Tron has already become one of the popular layer one over there. So what do you think, why PayFi become a buzzword? To me, it's a proven and mature growth thesis over there for more than 10 years.
Yeah, so I think roughly 3 reasons. One is, so Tron, for example, USDT, these things, they're very popular in the East and Asia, whereas most of, let's say, Twitter discourse is heavily West-centric, US-centric. And for example, I barely knew about Tron 2-3 years ago.
Oh, really?
Right? I mean, I knew what it was, but it nobody talks about it in the West as much because in the West, they care about, for example, Ethereum, now Solana, Sui, all these Silicon Valley located founders and chains and all these things. And then the regulation in the US and Canada is quite different, where you just cannot use crypto for basic things. So that's, I think, one reason. It's very West versus East thing in my view. 2 is, it's not super sexy to talk about payments, even though that's why Bitcoin was created in the first place, right? P2P cash.
Yeah.
But people, their attention gets dominated by things that go up 1 billion X in half a second, as opposed to something useful like paying for something, paying for a house in crypto or storing your wealth in there. And then 3 is just going to be crypto people love throwing around or appending the word fi to literally anything they can think of to make it an industry and convince other people to buy into that industry, right? Social fi, AI fi now, I think it's called DeFi, but it's an A instead of an I. So I think it's a combination of those 3 things.
Yeah, I agree. I think to some extent, PayFi, even it is a buzzword, but it might be, the most important killer app of the crypto. Me as an investor, I came across a lot of, high frequency use case innovation efforts in past few years. A lot of founders, they want to do a Web3 TikTok, Web3, BBS, etc. In the end of the day, all of them unfortunately fail. I understand their ambition because, when we talk about the internet, the most, juicy part would be the high frequency use case, like the Facebook, right? Like the WhatsApp. As long as, you control the time, basically you control the attention, and also you control the potential to monetize. But in general, I still feel, all the attempts to try those high frequency use case fail. the only, legit high frequency use case proved to be, very valuable by leveraging the Web3 technology is, the payment. Yeah, payment, cannot compete with chatting or social network, but it is, already very frequent, when we talk about people, at least, you have to do, a couple of payment every single day, right? By digital solution.
Mhm.
So what do you feel like, regarding the killer app? Do you think, the PayFi would be the killer frequency, use case, or there might be some other, even more popular use case for the Web3 in the future, like SocialFi?
Right. Well, yeah, I think PayFi is certainly one of the biggest use cases, if not the biggest. I mean, Bridge just got acquired by Stripe for $1.1 billion. And with the better regulation coming to the US, I'm seeing much more payments related things come out as well. Actually, Moonpay just acquired Helio for almost 200 million as well. Helio, not Helius, by the way, everybody confuses that. But fundamentally, blockchains, so like if the internet enables the flow of information, crypto turns information into value and value into information. So it's inherently financial technology, right? That's what the ledger is for. And payments is certainly a huge use case for that. But I don't think it's the only one. I think there are very interesting things you can do with all sorts of finance. So everybody knows about RWAs. Solana's vision, for example, is to be decentralized NASDAQ, right? To be the market where people put assets and then trade against each other and have optimal price discovery and all these different things. So trading, obviously speculation has been a pretty big one, payments. But then I think there are some interesting ones that will take many years to flesh out. So I think SocialFi is one of those where it's a new design space. So nothing like it really has existed before. And since nothing like it has existed before, it's very chaotic and people make all sorts of mistakes. So for example, like friend tech, but there's a bunch of so there's a company called Time.Fun on Solana where they're literally tokenizing time. And there's different examples of this. There's Kaido, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one, where they're financializing, in a sense, people's Twitter reach, but then mixing it with data insights so that you can understand what's going on. There's even card trading games with CT characters instead of like professional athletes. So there's a bunch of different interesting and weird things that are being experimented with. But I think the nature of those things, they're not linear, right? Payments are linear. There's all this human commerce, right? Everybody uses commodities, they trade things, they barter all these things. But this new wave my guess would be something like 5 to 10 years before it really finds footing, because finding product market fit and going 0 to 1 is extremely difficult. And so probably the immediate killer use case is scaling and updating the system that already exists today in the case of financial rails.
Okay. So in that case, hopefully, like, in the next few years, let's say, SocialFi or other systems can have a renaissance.
Yeah.
Maybe like, last batch is not a proper timing.
Yeah.
Like, iPhone is not the first producer of the smartphone, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Cool. And let's talk about the Solana disadvantage.
Mhm.
I mean, like, you are such a big fan and a promoter of the Solana. And we are also, the largest investor of Solana in MENA region. And we are very impressed by Solana performance, etc. But if you come up with one, assumption or reason, if Solana fail in the future, what might be the reason, make Solana become a failure?
Yeah, it's something I think about very frequently. I always try to find ways how Solana could fail to prepare for it. I think one easy way of thinking about it is basically what's happened with Ethereum. I don't think Ethereum's failed by any means, by the way, but I think it's slowed down quite a bit. And the reason is because it just is a much bigger chain now. There's much more value that settles on it, much more activity. There's more stake, more things to lose. But these things are still, in my view, scalable blockchains at least, are very early, still in their development. And so if you're decentralized too much, too early, then you slow down. And if you slow down, there's 1,000 competitors coming to kill you, basically, right? Some of these L2s, they don't have to decentralize. They can move very fast by being centralized first, and then perhaps decentralize in 5-10 years. And so I think being slow or slowing down development and pace of execution is a big risk. And I don't think Solana is safe from that. And so that's why everybody needs, so we say accelerate on Solana all the time to remind people, like, move faster. We need to move faster. Don't get complacent. It doesn't matter if you're in the top 5 or, if you're in the top 1 of revenue or whatnot, that can be taken away in 1 week, really. So that's, I think, the biggest risk. And then number 2 is, it's unclear. So there's one other case, in my view, where currently, if you put all the demand for block space in the world, it probably still fits in one chain today. There's not that much demand. Like if you look at Ethereum and all of its L2s, it's something like 250 TPS. And then there's Sui and Aptos, they're capable of more, but they still do something like 20 TPS on average. Because TPS is actually a measure of demand once you get past a certain capacity. Solana does something like 2,000 TPS from users. And so that's to say everything still fits within one chain. But let's say there's a huge explosion in the next 2-3 years, such that now you need to handle 500,000 TPS or something. I think Solana is probably still the best positioned to handle that with things like FireDancer, which is the more performant validator client coming. But it certainly could lose its edge as demand starts looking more spread out, as opposed to the core use cases of payments and launching tokens and trading tokens.
Yeah, I share the common feeling regarding the execution and the culture thesis you just shared. I feel like Ethereum is more getting too decentralized, and Solana is a good balance between as a corporate chain. I mean, with very sort of a super execution driven team, etc. But I guess in the end of the day, a chain needs to have a balance. Mm-hmm. If a chain become very corporate, like BNB chain, and then people will not believe you are a blockchain. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you feel about that? Like, what is your view on BNB chain? Like, BNB chain is very execution driven, right? But sounds like not a big fan. Not getting enough big fan from the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point, and this is what I was alluding to earlier when I said Solana is much more engineering focused than science focused. Because in science, you might do things just for their own sake. So, for example, decentralization for its own sake, I think, is a very common mistake. Decentralization is something that you pursue to enable something else. For example, security, right? If I put millions of dollars on chain, I need some mental security that I know it will be there and it won't be stolen. And the way to do that, there's 2 ways to do it. One is legal, right? That's why you trust banks, because they have certain regulatory clearance and legal clawback systems and all these different things, right? With credit cards, you can claw back certain money if you lose your credit card, etc. With a blockchain, if it's centralized, you don't have that guarantee, but you also don't have any guarantee, because you can just lose it. And this has happened many times in the past where people just lose money in centralized exchanges in the past, right? Yeah. Very common story. Every time I talk to somebody that's a little older, they'll tell me, oh yeah, I was in that Bitcoin exchange in 2012 and I sold my money. Sorry about that. Use a decentralized chain next time. Do not use a centralized thing. And so that is all to say, the purpose of decentralization isn't to go on Twitter and say, oh, we're very decentralized. Like, give me a pat on the back. It's to enable something that's practical, which is in this case, security, right? So that your funds are secure, so that nobody can steal it, so you're resistant to people attacking. And so from that case, it needs to be decentralized as much as possible to allow for that to happen. But it doesn't need to just, like, once you are, let's say, sufficiently secure, sufficiently safe, you don't need to keep decentralizing just for its own sake, because if you start doing that, then your chain becomes unusable. And if it becomes unusable, then how can anybody use it, right?
Yeah. So decentralized is not the end goal. The end goal would be like, you have to solve some problem, right? Decentralized or centralized shall be just a methodology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing, I got from my friend, which I feel very interesting, is like, some of my friends believe Tron is a payment gateway company, which claim to be a blockchain. Yeah, because they have like 20 nodes, something like that. Yeah, but like people believe all of them are managed by Justin Sun. So basically, this is a sort of a MasterCard or Visa company conduct the USDT transaction, which is also a very commercially success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. But so that's an interesting point, because like if you're using a chain for payments, I mean, it depends on what kind of payments. So if you're doing very large payments, then perhaps you feel more comfortable with something like Bitcoin, right? But if you're paying like, I don't know, $1,000, $500, or drinks at the bar or something like that, you don't need all that security, right? Like if you lose your $20, it's like, okay, whatever. I lost my $20, but
fast and cheap.
Yeah, like it all comes down to the use case that you're optimizing for.
Yeah.
Like if you're not going to store the entire world's wealth on one chain, you don't need to be that decentralized, right? You just need to be sufficiently decentralized to enable that use case.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Let's pivot the gears a little bit. Talk about some, VC coin. One thing I didn't get a clear answer from the market is, if we take a look about global top 10 token, there are some token, who claim to be a token with fundamental, but I just feel like, people buy them for the mimetic premium. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand, like, for their valuation, how much is driven by the fundamental and how much is driven by as a Dino coin, mimetic premium over there. So, I'm not very, clear about how to define the Cardano. I don't know how to define the XRP. So do you think they are a token with fundamental, or do you think they are a token, without fundamental, actually is a meme, but claim to have a fundamental?
Well, I think it's certainly the latter, where there are some ways it could have fundamentals that are strong in the future, but then they have very strong infrastructure, let's say, to tell that story on all sorts of things, whether it's TikTok, Reddit, the governments of the world, etc., where you can really sell people a story. But if you look at, so here's how I know that it's certainly not fundamentals driven today, right? Because if you look at the fundamentals, right? So, okay, what do you mean by fundamentals? If you look at a stock for a company, what do you look at? You look at their earnings, you look at their future cash flow. You're basically making a prediction based on expected future cash flow, right? In crypto, if you actually apply that, you would look at which chains actually generate revenue, which chains actually have, you would look at their margins perhaps, you would look at...
address?
Yeah, you would look at all sorts of things to determine how much money will this chain make in the future, how much of it will go to the stockholder, to me as a stockholder, right? Is there a dividend? Is there all these things? And if you look at those, well, Ethereum and Solana are by far the strongest, right? Solana, for example, has, I think it more than doubled Ethereum's total revenue in the past few months, right? That's pretty crazy, because Solana is worth, I believe, 4 to 5x less in terms of market cap than Ethereum. But it's not even in the top 3. Number 3 today, or last night when I checked, was XRP. Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP. And then I think it was Tether and BNB, and then Solana, and then things like Doge, for example. And then once you see Doge in there, you kind of start to understand, okay, it's definitely not fundamentals driven, because what are the fundamentals of Doge, right? It's very mimetic.
Yeah, but Doge don't pretend they have fundamental.
Correct.
They're authentic.
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. So that's what I mean. I like Doge because exactly, they don't pretend, and so they won't mislead anybody. You know what they are. You're getting a funny dot coin, but since it's already in the top 7, you can kind of see that how far you can get just by not even pretending to be anything of value.
Yeah.
Once you do start pretending that you are that, you can not only get the mimetic folks, but also people who potentially might not know too much about crypto to buy into some of these other coins. Now, I'm not going to give any financial advice because, I'm not an expert in this, but today it's certainly not fundamentals driven. In my view, I think it's probably 80-20 Pareto principle, where 80% is mimetic and social narrative, and then 20% maybe is fundamentals.
Yeah.
And the folks who look at the fundamentals are who you would expect, right? Like Van Eck, Franklin Templeton, all these guys. They actually look at those and give price targets based on that. But we'll see. Today it's certainly not the case.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. I think you need to teach the founders as many as possible. Let them to have a mimetic strategy, storytelling capability. In that case, they can manage their token very well. Even your fundamental will delay the perform, but still your token, your community will be there to wait for your fundamental to deliver.
Yeah, I mean it's very these blockchains in general. I think if you've been in the industry for a while, you are comfortable to the point where you have turned off filters in your mind that it's not actually that obvious to people who are not in crypto. So when I used to talk to people not in crypto, Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas, all these things, they would say, so what do you think about Shiba, right? Or what do you think about XRP, for example? And it's like, they genuinely don't know the difference. They don't care about this. They just see it on the news. They see it on the charts, right? If you open up CoinMarketCap today and you see the first 3, you're like, oh, okay, XRP is up 20% this week. Wow. It's in the top 3. It's right beside Ethereum. It must be legit, right? Nobody's going to look into, okay, let me see how much money they make, how much TVL they have, right? Like nobody's going to look at these things. So anyway.
Yeah. And you just mentioned Doji did a very good job as a authentic meme coin, but I have to say actually there's another one which is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a middle finger to the global money supply.
Yeah,
and that middle finger did very well, right? Right now it's 10% of the global gold market cap already, and that's a meme token.
It is, yes. Bitcoin is the OG meme coin.
Yeah.
But it's an authentic one where it's created to be a meme, basically. And meme isn't like a funny picture. Meme means a collective social belief that can be replicated across time and appeals to many people, right? With Bitcoin, it started out as literally replace central banks, literally replace the existing financial system. And to their credit, that is what they're doing. Like when you have Bitcoin, that's what you believe you're getting. There's some sort of belief that that's what you're actually enabling for yourself. And it certainly does a very good job of being super secure and actually not requiring governments and all these things. And so I think Bitcoin is rightfully number 1 today. We'll see if it remains number 1 forever. I don't see why not. But certainly there's also, even with Bitcoin, even though it's authentic, you can see the community members saying things that, like that's where the first, the term maxi comes from, right? The Bitcoin maxis, and we used to call them the laser eyes, right? Where they say something like Bitcoin fixes this to any problem possible, right? Which if you've been in crypto for a little bit, you're like, okay, no, it really does not fix that in any way. Yeah. But it's a meme that you can easily buy into.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, another topic is, could you talk about you set up the Helius in past few years and you want to enable the founders as many as possible. What is your long-term vision for Helius Labs in 5 years? How do you envision that?
Yes. So one of the things that I'm a big believer in is capitalism. Okay. And here's what I mean by this. I wrote, this is I don't want to get too abstract, but basically the way the current economy works, the global economy, not a local one, is you have a bunch of walled gardens. You have, let's say, the US economy, let's say you have the European economy, the Middle East one, Asian, but then even within Asia, there's China, there's Japan, Singapore, all these different things. And it's quite fragmented. And I believe that what needs to happen to increase the economic potential of the world, right, is something like a capitalistic American type of system where people from all over the world, founders, right, what do? Well, if they have a really good idea, perhaps they'll move to Silicon Valley or New York and they'll start a company. And so you have this network effect where everybody starts going to the same place. And then now you have this shared environment where there's existing infrastructure, risk capital infrastructure in Silicon Valley, VC firms. You have the tech scene, you have Wall Street, and you have all these things that are Seattle, Texas. And once you have that environment, then innovation starts increasing and accelerating and progressing. It's actually the same as a biological evolution, where it's not like there's some guy saying like, this animal is going to evolve better than this animal. That's not how it works. There's just a bunch of things, and then they fight it out against themselves, but also against their environment, and the best ones kind of rise to the top, or they evolve and they make it to the next cycle in the biological sense. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if you buy into the idea that a shared environment with decentralized, let's say, information flow is the best way to make progress and the best way for ideas to evolve over time, well, that's actually what crypto enables, but in terms of value, right? So if you have a giant global internet economy where a kid in Bangladesh, for example, can launch an app and start competing with Wall Street finance giants in doesn't have to be meme coins, it can be like a DEX, right? Or RWAs and anything of this nature. That's very interesting because now you have increased equality of opportunity, right? Not outcome, but opportunity. And so if you have more people with more tools that are able to contribute to the global economy, then the value flows across all these nations start becoming better, but you also start creating more value overall. And I think that's fundamentally the use case of crypto, which is increasing the economic GDP of the entire world. And so with Helius, what we're trying to do is, it's not about Solana. Like, we didn't pick Solana just because we like the chain. It's about, okay, how can we make it such that as many developers as humanly possible can contribute to the global economy, right? How can they just write a few lines of code and turn and move millions of dollars at the speed of light, or architect economies, or start a company on the internet that can compete with anybody, right? Because once you have that, you have competition. And if you have competition, then the best ideas win. And so you get more good ideas all over the world. And so with Helius, the vision, this isn't the 5-year vision, it's more like the 10-year vision, is you have an idea, and if you know any code at all, or maybe with AI, you don't even have to know code, you can just ship it. It just works on the blockchain. And if you increase the economic potential of developers all over the world, such that they can actually contribute to society and progress, then I think that's a much better world than the alternative, which is everybody's in these walled gardens and like interacting from China to the US, for example, is basically an impossible task unless you know the right people.
Yeah.
Right. If it's seamless and you get more people, you get more ideas. And so you have a better chance for the evolution of those ideas to be converted into progress.
Good. Yeah. I agree. I think, to some extent, it's like another comparable example would be like 200 years ago, for a farmer who are struggling in life in Europe, the best way would be immigrate to US. That's a new world, and own some piece of this new world. And now, digital asset create a digital world, and basically your vision would be like a Andrew Carnegie or Vanderbilt. You want to build up the infrastructure to make sure all the immigrants can generate the wealth and build their new business in this new world.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Certainly. Yeah. Before the internet, let's say you are a local restaurant, and okay, fine. You can make food and generate revenue and contribute to your local, let's say 5-block radius. But now you have things like Uber Eats or Careem and all these things. And now you have much bigger reach, right? But then also, if you really go back, you can just open a franchise in other places, right? McDonald's doesn't just exist in the city in the US that it was founded in. Now it exists everywhere in the world, right? And so I think if you can enable value to be transmitted like that all over the world, as opposed to just information like the internet, because I think crypto's actual use case is turning information into value and value into information. If you can enable that at a global scale for the entire financial system, then you have a much better infrastructure for building things, but also doing finance, right? Because people don't generally think of finance as building things, but it actually is, right? Like you need like risk capital, borrow lending is as old as time itself, payments, etc. Once you start accelerating these things, I think everything else benefits, right? It's not just crypto for its own sake, but like e-commerce benefits more, RWAs benefits more, creators can actually monetize their own assets or content much better. And so I think it's abstract today, but I think that ends up being roughly the most important thing in the next 10, 20 years.
That's very well said. Yeah. Okay, cool. And thank you, Mert, for your time. Cool. Thank you.